The trauma created by violence is no doubt lifelong, and for some survivors, it can be unbearable. Recently, there have been reports of 2 teens who took their lives in the aftermath of the Parkland school shooting, as well as the father of a little girl murdered in Newtown. I sat down with Sarah Kendall, the vice president of the Mental Health Association in Springfield and a licensed social worker, to find out how to help people suffering from PTSD and unimaginable heartbreak.
In the last few weeks, we have experienced, I think, nationally some pretty significant loss secondary to suicide death. And a number of us internally within our agency meet on a monthly and bi-monthly basis to see, as a touchstone, how we're doing within our roles. And something that just became quite obvious and an overt nature for us to discuss was suicide. It's something that we had seen as a secondary kind of news story happening once, twice, and then 3 times within a very short window. So we wanted to talk kind of together as a team and to see how that is something that we could make sure was something we were bringing out kind of throughout the rest of our agency, to assure that we were providing opportunities for folks if they were feeling any thoughts at all of feeling unsafe, that they knew that it was something that was an okay topic to discuss. I think feelings around thoughts of wanting to harm oneself, thoughts of wanting to not live anymore, or simply thoughts of wanting to kill oneself oftentimes are not thoughts that folks often feel like they can easily talk to a professional about. It can be something that I think we can agree has become taboo, in our communities and our society. It's very different to ask for assistance for that. Very different than if, say, you had a headache or if your stomach hurt, or if you had an ache in a different way. I think it's easier to ask for help for that. So one of the things we wanted to really highlight was the opportunity for us to be able to say to folks, hey, if you're feeling this way as well, it's just as important. It's more important for you to know we want to hear. It's okay to talk about that. So that's where the conversation started.
And there is help.
There is help. There's so much help. And I think all the help in the world isn't going to be helpful unless you know it's there, right? And so, yeah, there is help. There's local help. From our agency, we have the opportunity to provide immediate help at, directly at a program in the community, at someone's home. Within our local communities, we have crisis centers. There's national suicide prevention hotlines. There's rape, abuse, and incest national network lines. There are so many opportunities for us to be able to connect folks with safety, with something, with support. Absolutely.
And when you look at the national cases that you're talking about, so there were 2 teenagers who lived through the Parkland shooting, who took their lives, and then a father from Newtown. And when you look at just the trauma and the devastation from both of those stories, I mean, just the absolute pain for those communities, and really as a nation, looking at the loss of life, and then to add this to it, it's almost like, how could you possibly, live through that in your community again, that pain?
Yeah.
How do you help people deal with that, even from far away, reading those news stories?
Well, and I think that's just it. I think it was something that we can collectively feel as a community, and it almost allows us to, I think if we can allow ourselves, it allows us to have that community resiliency and the community spirit that I think oftentimes it feels in our culture we no longer have, right? I think sometimes we don't feel like we have the same neighborhood or the same community, sense that we've had in decades past, right? But I think, after there's such a significant loss that we, had recently experienced, that's where I think folks are affected, is within that community heart that we have, and in that community place to want to reach out and to want to be able to assist in some way. I think, oftentimes I know colleagues of mine have done very similar things. They reach out internally to assure that they're doing what they can do within their agency, within their smaller communities. They reach out to their families. I know that's what I did, kind of reaching out to those closest to us and then our communities. And then seeing how we can then reach out to the communities that are then affected to say, you're not alone.
And it used to be that you didn't talk about suicide because you're really afraid that perhaps you're going to give somebody the idea to do that. And I think a lot of people still feel that way because they don't want to give somebody, just even a thought that is a possibility. But that's not, as a clinical social worker, that's not the advice that you give people.
Right, that's correct. It's almost the exact opposite of that is, we would say to folks, and I say to folks in trainings, is that the fear that we have in asking the question is that you would never introduce an idea to an individual that they wouldn't have had themselves. I think we have the fear for asking the question for what the response may be. It's always safe to ask a question because the person that you're asking it to just knows that you care and you're asking from a place of concern. So there's always safety in that. Knowing that there's a secondary person that you can reach out to. And I know oftentimes I've been asked a lot in the last week or two is, who do I call? Where do I start? It's easy for me to say, I'm a clinician, I have been for a long time, that there are a lot of services out there. But what does that mean to a person who doesn't work
the number,
in
right?
the field,
Yeah.
right? But you can even start with your trusted primary care doctor. Starting with someone you trust. It could be a faith leader. It could be a priest or a pastor, like we had discussed. Just someone that has been a trusted person in your world is always a safe person to start with. Reaching out to, if you have a child or an adolescent, reaching out to a school system, that's a great place to start. We end up being a small network, and so it's easy to connect kind of from one person to the next. And oftentimes it ends up being like the primary care physician or the pediatrician is a good person to start with.
And when you look at those recent cases, obviously they lived through just something that we can't even imagine. So they have had PTSD and just something that was just so overwhelming. But there are many people, and we talk about first responders, think about, nurses and doctors in the ER who live with this every day and who are saving people's lives and see, just horrendous things and then have to go home and take care of their family. How do you reach out to those members of the community as well, that it's okay to talk about what they've seen?
Thank you for asking that. I'm glad that you mentioned that. Yes, one of the things that I think we have, really been able to more so identify in the last couple of years is that individuals that work in fields where they are surrounded by individuals who have experienced recent, traumatic events and are providing life-saving, care are involved and surrounded by what we call secondary trauma. They're experiencing what is known as vicarious traumatization. Compassion fatigue is something very real that individuals professionally can experience. It's tremendously important, and we talk about this kind of with each other in the world and professionally, is having a work-life balance. But what does that mean? It's really important to be able to have, good quality personal balance and good self-care when you're not in your workspace, but to even acknowledge that every day, day after day, for some of our folks that are, say, providing that first responding care or emergency medicine, that it's important for them to know that, the same signs and symptoms or feelings that individuals may experience, after they, survived a natural disaster, may be something that they experience as well. So it's important, I think, for all of us that are surrounded by, whether we're caretakers or just a community member, to watch ourselves, to monitor ourselves, to check in with ourselves.
And so the bottom line is that we just really have to talk about this openly in our families like we're talking about our physical health.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the reality is our health is our health. We're one full person, and that's our physical health, our spiritual health, our mental health, that all comprises who we are, and it's all important.